Right, so welcome everybody. Good afternoon. I hope you're having a lovely day. It's a sunny, beautiful day here in the UK, in Nottingham at least. I'm Graziella Figueiredo. I'm Associate Professor in Health Data Science from the University of Nottingham, and I will be sharing this webinar today. So this webinar, just to give you a quick background, this is a new webinar series as part of the Federated Analytics Programme from the HDR UK, and it's organized on behalf of the HDR technology community. So just a brief update. This series is going to happen recurrently. We're more than happy to hear your thoughts and your suggestions on how we can improve it and build a community around federated learning. And we will start by just giving a brief update on our activities, and then we'll go for the webinars that are scheduled today. So just some housekeeping. The session today will be recorded. If you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A session in Zoom. Let's follow the HDR values and please enjoy the webinar. So starting the webinar today, we're going to have a brief update from the Federated Analytics Programme, which will be delivered by Tim Beck. So Tim Beck is an associate professor in Federated Systems and Bioinformatics at the University of Nottingham. He has experience in developing and implementing infrastructure support for federated analytics, and he's also a member of the GA4GH Discovery Workstream. He's the health data lead at Elixir UK node and the co-lead of the HDR UK Federated Analytics Programme. Following Tim, we'll also have a talk from Professor Andre Dekker that I'll introduce prior to his talk, and also Stelios Theophanous. Tim, I'll leave it for you to give your updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Graziella. I think you need to stop sharing your screen, Graziella, so I can share mine. Thank you. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see those slides. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this webinar. So I'm going to give a quick introduction to Federated Analytics and present a one-slide overview of the HDR UK Federated Analytics Programme, which is responsible for organising this webinar today. So what do we mean by federated analytics? So this is the process of analysing data across multiple environments. So the data can be sensitive, so it cannot simply be brought into one environment, and or the data are too large to move. So broadly speaking, there are different types of analytics that are used for particular purposes and outcomes. So federated discovery enables data to be found. Federated analysis is the deeper examination and interrogation of the data. And federated learning is used to train machine learning models. And it's federated learning that we're going to hear more about today. So in all of these cases, the data stays where it is, and the question or the analysis or the machine learning model is taken to the data. So the Federated Analytics Programme is assembling and integrating existing infrastructure to support easier and reproducible federated analytics within trusted research environments. So as the foundation for this, we are using the work from two projects that have demonstrated how you can network TREs and run analytics across many TREs. So Teleport makes individual TREs appear to the user as if they're on the same network. This means that the user only needs to log into one TRE, and disclosure control. This is the process that ensures that outputs are safe, only needs to be performed once instead of multiple times. So TREFX or TRIFX enables analytics to be run across multiple TREs where the analytics and the results move and the data stays within the TREs. So all configurations, all the code, the environments, they're captured and recorded to enable reproducibility. So on top of that, the program is using international standards from organizations such as G4GH and Elixir. We are part of international consortia, so we learn from what works well elsewhere and share what we have developed in the UK. And we're also active in building an open collaborative ecosystem. So this is promoting open development best practice across the Federated Analytics Programme. So we have different ways for you to find out more about the Federated Analytics Programme. So we have a mailing list that will keep you up to date with the announcements. There is a technical drop-in session that is open to all, so anyone can come along, meet the team, ask questions, and find out more about the program. If you join the mailing list, then you'll receive the connection details for these drop-in sessions. Between the drop-in sessions, we use GitHub discussions to keep the conversations going. And today, as we mentioned, is the first webinar of a series that we will run every 2 months, covering a different topic around federated analytics each time. Okay, so now we have a quick section for audience participation, but nobody needs to worry because this is just going to be a poll. So since this is the first time that we've run this type of webinar, we're going to ask a bit about you, so folk that have made time in their day to join this Federated Analytics webinar. So we've got 2 questions to find out if you've joined other HDR UK webinars in the past and how familiar you are with Federated Analytics. So if you could spend 30 seconds answering these questions, we'd be very grateful, and all responses are anonymous. So hopefully that should have appeared on your screen.
Thank you, team. So now proceeding to the next speaker, we're going to have a talk from Professor Andre Dekker, who is a professor in clinical data science at Maastricht University. And he's also a professor in Maastricht Clinic in the Netherlands. His clinical data science has an impressive number of 50 researchers, and they are focused on federated fair data infrastructures, AI for health outcome prediction models, and applying AI to improve health of patients and citizens. And Professor Dekker has also authored over 250 publications and has more than 50 PhD students. He has patents and has visited research appointments at universities in the UK, Australia, Italy, USA, and Canada. Welcome, Professor Andre. Thanks very much for your time here. We'll have time for questions in the end of the talk. So if you have any questions, please pop in the chat. We'll do our best to answer all of them, but if we go over time, we'll pass them on to the speakers and we'll get back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this lovely introduction, and thank you for having me at this first Federated Analytics webinar. So I do have some disclosures to make. I'm not sure if that's needed in these type of things, but I want to mention that we have a company, a spin-out from the hospital in which I'm involved, called Medical Data Works, in which we support this Vantage 6 open source solution. So bear that in mind in this presentation. So let me start by quickly saying to you why we started federated learning in Maastricht, and it had to do with a research that we did in 2006, in which we had doctors predict 2-year survival in lung cancer patients, and we found out that doctors were very bad at that. So they basically couldn't, on an individual level, predict whether or not a patient would live or die 2 years from now. And that started for us a journey on outcome prediction modeling and wanting to improve the accuracy of our prediction, because we felt if we can more accurately predict which cancer patient benefits from which treatments, we should be able to help our patients choose better which treatment fits them. So that's the goal of our research. And as was mentioned, outcome prediction model is a big thing. But Maastricht is too small. And so what we wanted to do is have data from all hospitals in the world, aggregate that, and nowadays that's done with AI, it used to be more statistics, use that in the next patient, see what happens, and create a learning healthcare system in our hospital, but also in other hospitals in the world, rather than just doing what we do now. So that's our rationale. And obviously in our thinking, so we're very much a real world data, hospital-based routine clinical data group. Not so much in the omics domain. So we work with EHR data and imaging data coming out of the clinic. So our main goal is to ask ourselves the question: how can we get access to 100,000 hospitals? Because that's where the data that we need to do this outcome prediction modeling sits. And so we're mainly worried about that problem, not so much the size or the quality of the data. Our main issue is fragmentation. And as I'm sure you know, if you ask people, send me all your data to Maastricht, give me all the data of the UK to Maastricht, for instance, you have a few answers. People don't like that. So they will tell you, I don't have the time, I don't want you to have my data, I'm not allowed to use to do that, ethics and privacy, and I can't. So this whole federated data, federated learning infrastructure is trying to address some of those long-standing barriers by not sharing the data, as was already mentioned by Tim. So if you don't want to centralize the data, you want to have a federated approach, you have to bring the research to the data rather than the data to the research. And if you want to do that, then, and here comes a metaphor that I'm going to use quite often, if you want to do that, then you have to solve a number of technical challenges. The first thing is that you have to be able to send each other questions, right? So I have to be able to send a question from Maastricht to Nottingham, for instance. And so we call those questions trains in our metaphor. Now, if the Nottingham would receive our train from Maastricht and will double click, and that train would start analyzing the data locally, Nottingham IT and the hospital would go berserk, because what's in that train, what is it doing, why is it using our data, starts communicating with the outside world. And so you need a lot of governance. And I'll spend a little bit of time on that and security, and we call this track in the metaphor. But you're still not done, because if you send a train from Maastricht to Nottingham, that train doesn't speak English. So the data in Nottingham has to be in a state where not only can it be read by an application, but can be understood by an application. So that's a very high demand, because it not only talks about what syntax is there, or Excel or relational database or a graph, as we are more fond of, but also the SNOMED codes have to be the same. The interoperability has to be at a very high standards, and nowadays that's called FAIR data. And many, I'm sure if you know this. So we call these FAIR data stations. So in our thinking, every hospital is a station, every question is a train. And the trains need to reach the stations over the track. And that's, in our metaphor, the personal health train. So that's how we often explain it also to lay people. Now, just to give you a short introduction of our local history. So we've been working on this since 2007, when we first written in a grant that the CAT project, the Computer Assisted Diagnostic Project, will use heterogeneous data from distributed database in multiple clinical centers to develop and validate patient-specific prediction models. So that has been our goal from the start. And this CAT is now, for instance, as Stelios will tell you, is the CAT and atomCAT. It started at that time. We then developed such a system with Siemens, the EuroCAT project, but we were unhappy with Siemens and any other vendor with that, because Siemens put in a hook, and the hook was an IP hook. That is, anytime you learn something in our infrastructure, we get to have first option rights on what is learned. So they put in an IP hook. And that doesn't scale very well, because nobody likes it, obviously. So in 2014, or 10 years ago, we started our open source version to compete with our own collaborator. They knew about this, but that's the predecessor of Vantage 6 that I'll talk about. Then we created this personal health metaphor together with the people in Leiden who were developing the concept of FAIR data, which is important to the principle. And then in 2016, but there was a name change, right? So until that time, in 2016, we produced our first paper on distributed learning. You can see here the title, Developing a Predictive Model Based on Data on Multiple Hospitals Without Data Leaving the Hospital. And 2017, Google also came out with their federated learning solution. And since then, it's called federated learning. So there was a name change, if you want, from distributed to federated learning. And they were using it to learn from the droid fonts, especially the keyboard predictions. Since that time, obviously things are doubling every time, so now it's an exponential subject. We went on with the Dutch Cancer Registry, which is now hosting the open source version of Vantage 6. It was first called PPDLI, Privacy Preserving Distributed Learning Infrastructure. And nowadays, as was mentioned quite quickly in the beginning, it's part of Health AI, let's say the flagship research infrastructure in the Netherlands, which has this federated learning principle and so forth and so forth. So that's a bit of our story. What's now 18 years or something, 17 years in the making. And now it's part for the health ministry and other things. So at the moment in my department, we run about 21 projects and 20 of them are federated learning. So we have moved completely to this principle in different, we still work mostly in cancer, but we also work in Alzheimer and in COVID and arthritis and so forth. And we also nowadays work outside of medicine because the principle of using sensitive data to learn something useful obviously applies to other people. So that has grown to a network of international centers. And from the beginning, Cardiff, Manchester, and Leeds have always been very active with us, right? So it's also very good that Stelios is presenting next because they put a truckload of work in this space. But it also enables us to do federated learning projects on a global scale. And we want to do it global for a number of reasons. First of all, of course, globally you have more data. So what you learn in terms of AI and machine learning will be better, generally speaking, because more data means better AI. But more importantly for us, it's more diverse data, right? If you want to learn an AI that works in all races and all health systems, and all types of CT scanners and health systems that you have, then the AI needs to see that, right? The federated learning algorithm needs to see that. And so going global especially is useful to get generalizable conclusions. So that's our main reason to do it. So an example project, I'll just show one. As I told you, I have many, but I want to talk about Vantage 6 and some of the tech behind it. So this is a project that we have finished recently. Again, it includes UK centers, Cardiff, Manchester, and Leeds. And so what we're trying to do here is learn in AI that can, on an image, find out where the tumor is. So this is a CT scan. This is where the doctor thinks in yellow where the tumor is, and this is where the AI thinks that the tumor is. And so our goal is to learn such an AI so that the doctor doesn't have to delineate the tumor. I mean, you might also get better standardization of the delineation. And again, doing it globally in India and Brazil and China and Europe, and the States, we hope to get an AI which generalizes well. And so that works well. You see here for the guys in AI or girls in AI, there's this iterations, epochs, and you can see the quality of the delineation. You actually compare this one and this one go up, and so that is going well, and we're publishing on that, just as an example. This is something we're doing at the moment, trying to roll it out with across Europe in cancer by European funding. And again, Leeds is involved. Jeff Hall actually works, I think, Stelios boss nowadays. So we're heavily involved with you guys as well. Okay, so that's some introduction of where we're coming from. Now about Vantage 6. So I'm never sure how deep technically I need to go, because there's also this new seminar, but let me give you some principles here. So the principle, what we started at least with, if you have a researcher with a question or train in our lingo, there's this track. This is hosted by a neutral party. In our case, it's Medical DataWorks, that spin-out I told you about mostly, but it can be anyone. And then you have hospitals that have data and that want to work together. So the researcher launches a task. The task is being sent to each of those nodes. The task is calculated on each of those nodes. The task results are shared, and iteratively you can learn a model or an AI or a dashboard or cohort discovery or whatever you want to learn in that way And it's Docker-based, so we use Docker a lot. And that's the start. So some design principles is we want to have each party to own their own data. So we are in full control, and you decide as a hospital what is being done with your data. It's quite important. We want to have flexibility. So nowadays we can handle both horizontally and vertically partitioned scenarios. And if you don't know what that means, just ask and I'll explain in the chat. It did mean that we had to do some node-to-node communication difference in the infrastructure, which is now built in. And we also have heterogeneity as our principle. So people can have different hardware, different operating system, different source data models, right? Some people, they might use images in DICOM, somebody might use OMOP, or somebody might use one of the omics standard, but somebody might use Excel, or per project this has to be standardized or graph, but we want to be flexible in that. And we're also flexible in the algorithm language. So if you want to build your federated learning, we started in MATLAB, for instance, and then we moved to R, and nowadays we do everything in Python. That should be flexible as well. So that's, and it does all these things differ between our projects generally. Some very technical stuff. What do you need locally? I'm not sure if if you were looking for this, but anyway, so there's very minimal requirements. If you do a simple text-based algorithm, if you do a federated deep learning, obviously things quickly become heavy, because you have to locally have, or in the cloud, wherever you are allowed to store your data in this trusted environment, as was just discussed. Maybe in the UK, it can be moved in those environments. But anyway, if you want to do something simple, you need simple, and if you want to do something hard, you need high power stuff. Very different OSs. You need the internet to work. You need some firewall settings to be, you have to allow HTTPS communication, and you should be able to reach, in this case, the medical data works one, but if somebody else hosts this, the Vantage 6 can be something else. You have to be able to find those sites. In terms of security and privacy, so this requires quite a bit of things. We do a lot of data protection impact assessment, and I'm sure you are doing such things as well in your environments. We do penetration tests. We recently did one in January to find out how it worked. There are some basic things that are implemented, like every project is separated. So if you were part of the atomCAT project that Stelios will show you, you're not necessarily a member of another project, or can see other projects that are doing something else. User role-based access to factorization. We work in the Azure cloud, but now we're gonna, for someone else wants to host something in the Google cloud, and then we're gonna help them do that. So it depends on how do you want that. Tracks are protected, obviously, with encryption. You don't need a public IP. This is actually quite important. So in some implementation of federated learning, centers are required to put their data in the DMZ. That's not going to work for hospitals. They will never do that. So that's important. So it's a pull system rather than a push system. And we're working on getting this 27001 certification. Should be okay. Governance should not be underestimated in such things. So this is showing what we're doing for Vantage 6. This is the Medical Data Works ones, but it's really, I think, not really related to any specific implementation of federated learning. You still need to write a research protocol. You still need to get agreement between the people that have data and the people that want data, like things like intellectual property and money. You will need to contract with someone that hosts the infrastructure. So in this case, it's with us in Medical Data Works, but you can have other ones. And you still need approval from a whole bunch of people. So some people want to use federated learning to get rid of all that governance, but that's not going to work. Sorry to bust that bubble. But what we do see generally that this is quite accepted, because for many reasons it's a privacy by design system. For organizations that are like you, that are part of the DPA in the UK or GDPR or something similar, or the ones that are coming in the UK, and there's some more work to do, because according to the law, people are processors or controllers, and this is in federated learning quite intricate. And so that requires a position of everyone, and typically also everyone needs to do the PIA to understand the risks of such a system. But And there's lots of help on that. And we do have those all those things open access available for so these agreements, for instance, and how do you do that? And how do you do a joint controller? And given our work, it's also important not to force everyone onto GDPR, because a center in the US will not like it if Maastricht forces them to follow GDPR, because that's a risk for them, right? So it has to be, these agreements have to be quite, as I say, intricate to make sure that everyone involved is covered by the regulations that they have to follow. In terms of the roadmap, so where we're going with Vantage 6, well, we have some, at the moment, sitting on a bag of funding to go at least for the next 4 or 5 years. So we have plenty of money to work on this. We have, so this is version 1, as you say, 2018. This is now this is the full, let's say, released version, September. The upcoming features here, the most important one is this algorithm store. And I want to spend a little bit of time on that, because the Federated AI algorithm store basically has to be a trusted environment where people can pull an algorithm to them and they know for sure that the algorithm is checked and secured and checksummed and it only does what it promises to do. This has been an important requirement from the beginning. You as a hospital want to make sure that the algorithm that is running inside your environment is not some rogue R script or Python script from some kind of researcher, but is, doing exactly what it promises to do. And that's what we call the trusted Federated AI algorithm store. It's still, completely open source, but somebody has to take responsibility for these things. We're also looking at Kubernetes, Kotlin, different container technology, except besides Docker, working on better support for different sources and easier deployment. And this is now, by the way, this is the recent version. It's April, so the algorithm store is now there. We just have to fit it further. And this is what we're filling it with. As Tim was saying it, there are a few phases, right? So we actually in the federated learning have to go typically through all those phases, right? We first have to find out, how many patients does everyone have, what data elements does everyone have. Then we have to do some basic analysis about bias and perhaps of imputation and augmentation, and then we can start the learning. And then when you're done with the learning, you want to start validating in all kinds of ways. So our idea of the algorithm store is that you can pull these things and put them, put these modular behind each other so that your learning project is complete. This is work in progress, right? As I said, nowadays it's much more a free for all. And since if you trust that researcher with their Docker, then you can run it. But we want to go more towards this modular based way of doing federated learning. So the key messages of Vantage 6 is for me is that fair federated data infrastructure for us. As you can see, we're basically doing every project like this, so it's becoming the standard, at least for us, working in the clinical data and in the imaging domain. Nobody wants to share that data anymore, and so that's there. Vantage 6 has been a long-going, battle-tested thing. And we are really doing it with real patient data in real hospitals on a global scale, and it's community-driven open source. So we firmly believe that this works. It doesn't mean it certainly isn't the best, but it does work. So what are the challenges that we're facing as a federated learning community as a whole? It's still somebody has to make the data fair at the source or interoperable at the source, and that still is the main concern. Still the most work, right? You can say to people, map it to OMOP or any other common data standard that you might think of, but that typically takes quite a while to get hospital routine data into a different format and syntax and so forth. Legal and governance, although we're getting better and better at that, and maybe Stelios also tell something about that. Still getting, I think I was telling about 17 partners that are joining this federated learning on CT scans before, getting that whole consortium agreeing and signing, the real agreement is taking a long time. And then a more painful thing is that, with federated learning, you are, I won't say guaranteed, but you're very close to making sure that privacy is preserved, but then it turned out that privacy was never the problem. So people still don't want to share data, right? So it don't think that this solves everything. As I said, we're working on this algorithm store, trusted trains, and then we also want to integrate. We have one project we want to integrate Vantage 6 with Data Shield, with Café Varium, I think it's called, and so there are 25 different implementations of federated learning, and hopefully we can at some point integrate with them. That's my quick introduction of Vantage 6, and hopefully I've been quick enough to keep some room for Stelios and then questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. We're going to proceed to the next speaker now, please. Stelios, whenever you're ready to share your screen. So Stelios is a data scientist at Leeds Hospital Trust. He's specialized in federated learning to improve healthcare outcomes. He leads the transformation of the Leeds Hospital patient data to the OMOP format. He's part of the DG1 network. And his current and past research is mainly focused on cancer research and improved patient care. Thanks very much, Stelios. Whenever you're ready, you can start.
Thank you for the introduction, Graziella, and good afternoon, everyone. So in my presentation today, I will talk about the atomCAT studies, which I carried out as part of my PhD studies at the University of Leeds. And then in this atomCAT studies, we basically implemented federated learning using the Vantage 6 infrastructure that Andre has introduced in order to develop and validate outcome prediction models in anal cancer. So first, I will give a short introduction on what federated learning is and what its main advantages are. And this will be quite short since Andre has already provided a more detailed explanation. After that, I will present my work on the atomCAT 1 and atomCAT 2 studies. And at the end, I will mention some of the common challenges that we face when we set up and carry out the federated learning project. So the first question we're answering today is, what is federated learning? But before we get there, let me give you some context around anal cancer, which was the focus of the atomCAT studies. So anal cancer is a rare disease with a rising incidence rate. The current gold standard of care for localized disease involves radiotherapy and concurrent chemotherapy, with surgery left as a salvage treatment. And studies have shown that this treatment regimen leads to relatively good outcomes. However, chemoradiotherapy still leads to numerous early and late side effects that can impact the quality of life of patients even years after they complete their treatment. So you might be wondering, why do we want to study anal cancer? Well, in the past decade or so, with modern precision oncology that has brought an increasing use of molecular profiling and tumor substratification, it means that a growing number of patients are being treated with targeted agents based on their tumor genetic profiles. And this means that all cancers are becoming rare cancers. And therefore, in these studies, we use the anal cancer as an exemplar for rare cancers. But there are also many challenges associated with conducting research in the context of a rare cancer. So for example, data sets from a single center are often limited in size, so it can be quite difficult to obtain enough data locally to generate robust evidence or robust conclusions. Specifically in anal cancer, the studies examining the effect of prognostic factors for different disease outcomes have quite inconsistent findings, and the majority of these findings have not been externally validated. In addition, there are very few studies examining the effect of other more complex factors like tissue, blood, and imaging biomarkers on these outcomes. And finally, tumor volume data are not available in the majority of data sets, and definitely not in registries. So we thought one approach that we could use to address all these challenges is, of course, federated learning. So back to our original question, what is federated learning? So you might be more familiar with the traditional multi-institutional data analysis approach, where data is pulled from multiple locations into a central repository, and then it's analyzed centrally to create the central model. In federated learning, however, no individual level patient data is shared between centers, but instead the model is sent to each of the center's nodes, where it is updated locally with the local data. And then only model updates and aggregate statistics are sent back to the central server or a neutral node where they're compiled together to form the federated model. And this is an iterative approach, and this is where this federated approach differs from a meta-analysis approach, for example, where the model is sent back and forth between the central server and the nodes multiple times until the final model converges. And this final model that we generate is almost mathematically identical to the model that is generated by the traditional centralized approach. And the main advantages of federated learning over the traditional approach are that it helps us preserve patient data privacy by not having to share an individual level patient data across centers, which in turn minimizes ethical and regulatory compliance issues. In addition, the traditional approach often presents challenges with data silos, where the valuable data that we have is fragmented across other different institutions or even different systems within an institution. And therefore, we're not actually using the data to its full potential. But with federated learning, we can overcome these silos and enable collaborative model training across these distributed data sources. And finally, by adopting a federated learning approach, we can analyze larger, more diverse data sets, improving the robustness and generalizability of our models. And ultimately, this leads to more accurate predictions and insights. And this brings us to the aim of the first atomCAT study, which was to demonstrate the feasibility of conducting federated learning across 3 European centers. We had University of Leeds with Leeds teaching hospitals, Oslo University Hospital in Norway, and Maastricht Clinic in the Netherlands. So in this proof of concept study, we analyzed data from 281 patients that were treated with conformal radiotherapy techniques for anal cancer across the 3 centers. And this, at the time, was the largest international retrospective cohort to have been analyzed. In the main analysis phase, we created a federated Cox regression model for overall survival, which performed quite well. So we had a concordance index of 0.72 that was also maintained during the leave one center out cross-validation phase. So overall, the atomCAT-1 study demonstrated the feasibility of federated learning for outcome prediction modeling in the context of a rare cancer. And then next, we thought, why not extend this work further in order to include even more centers and analyze more patient data? So we wrote the protocol for the next study that was called atomCAT-2, and we shared it with many centers across the world that are treating anal cancer. So a few months later, we established the atomCAT consortium that now consists of 16 centers across the UK, 8 European countries, and Australia. So in atomCAT-2, we aim to expand our cohort in order to analyze data from more than 1,000 patients. And in addition to overall survival, we also wanted to explore 2 more clinically important outcomes: local regional control and freedom from distant metastasis. And ultimately, through developing and validating these federated prediction models, we aim to identify key prognostic factors for each of these 3 outcomes. Throughout the study, we tried to implement a very much an open science approach, and we did this in several ways. Firstly, we pre-registered our study protocol and statistical analysis plan in Open Science Foundation. And we, once we finalized these using feedback from all of the other centers that we recruited, we published them in an open access journal. Specifically in the protocol, we pre-specified which factors we would be including in our models, and we carried out a prospective sample size calculation in order to find out how many factors we could include in our models for different cohort sizes, because at the time we did not know what the final cohort size would be. For the federated learning analysis, we chose to use the Vantage 6 federated learning platform because it is open source and free for all of the centers to use. And finally, we're sharing all the code that we developed and used throughout the study in GitHub and GitLab. In terms of the technical details, we developed a project-specific data dictionary to make clear to all of the participating centers which data items they had to collect and how to code these. During the model development phase, we developed a single primary multivariable model for each outcome. And as I mentioned before, all models were pre-specified, so we didn't carry out any variable selection during the analysis phase that could lead to model overfitting. In addition to the primary models, we also developed several secondary models for each outcome in order to explore the impact of other less established factors on these outcomes. The performance of the models was evaluated using RLC index, using two different approaches. So first was the internal leave one center out cross-validation, where we trained the model on the data from all centers except one, and then we validated on that final center. And of course, we repeated that multiple times to cover all the possible combinations. The second approach was the external validation approach, where we validated the models on completely unseen data sets that were not used for model training. So overall, we trained our models using data from 1,428 patients that exceeded our aim at the start of the study. And we externally validated them on data from an additional 277 patients. And these are the summary statistics from the primary and validation cohorts, but I'm not going to go through these in detail. Instead, I want to highlight that almost 28% of patients were 70 years or older, and these are the patients that are likely to be excluded from clinical trials. So this is what we mean by learning from every patient. In addition, more than 80% of patients were treated between 2010 and 2022, showing that this was a rather contemporary or modern cohort. Here we have the summary information on the prescribed radiotherapy dose, the radiotherapy technique that was administered, and the chemotherapy regimen that was delivered. Importantly, we're able to plot the outcomes of patients across all centers. So these graphs show in the shaded bands represent the 95% confidence intervals for each of the centers, and the line in the middle represents the overall cohort weighted mean. Our federated prognostic models show that 6 factors are prognostic for overall survival. 3 were found to be prognostic for locoregional control, and 2 for freedom from distant metastases. Here it's important to highlight the lack of effect of the radiotherapy dose on any of the outcomes, which is actually interesting because it's being investigated in the Plato trial. So it will be great to see how the results from this clinical trial compare to the results from a real-world evidence study. And as you can see here, the tumor volume appears to be the most consistent prognostic factor across the 3 outcomes. In terms of the performance of the models, they appear to be performing quite well, both when internally validated as well as externally validated. And these calibration graphs also show that the model can stratify patients into low risk and high risk groups quite well. Using the models, we can then go back to our original data sets and our local data sets and stratify patients even further. So for example, using the Leeds patients only here, we can identify patients who have a low risk of locoregional failure and distant metastases, a high risk for locoregional failure, but low risk for distant metastases, low risk for locoregional failure, but high risk of distant metastases, and finally, high risk for both outcomes. In addition, we can explore the effect of different factors even further. So for example, in the graph on the right, we can see the effect of the primary tumor volume on both of the outcomes. And through this methodology, we can use our models to explore different treatment options for these subgroups of patients that we identify as a way of improving outcomes and, of course, improving care for our patients. So overall, through federated learning, we're able to analyze the largest contemporary international anal cancer cohort. We demonstrated that the nodal involvement is an important risk factor for distant metastasis, but not for local regional control. And tumor volume appears to be prognostic for all three outcomes that were explored. More importantly, we proved that large-scale data analysis is possible for rare cancers without actually having to share individual-level patient data. And this opens up new opportunities to extend this work to more novel risk factors, including blood or imaging-based biomarkers, as well as toxicity prediction, which I think is where the real potential of federated learning lies. But of course, before we could successfully complete this project, we also had to face many challenges. So in this final section of my presentation, I will give you a peek of what goes on behind the curtains. And more specifically, I will discuss some of the common challenges that we may face when we set up and conduct a federated learning project, but of course, from the atomCAT 2 perspective. So one of the biggest challenges in atomCAT 2 was actually setting up and getting the collaboration agreement reviewed and signed by all centers, which actually took more than a year to complete. So initially, we used the collaboration agreement from another federated learning project called Argos that Andre showed before. And we used that as a template because it had already undergone multiple rounds of review by multiple international centers, including some centers that were participating in atomCAT 2 as well. But unfortunately, this did not make our life much easier. So we initially circulated the first draft to all centers in April 2021 and asked them to send it to their legal contacts for review. And then by December 2021, we also contacted the University of Leeds contracts team and asked them to review it on our behalf. In February 2022, we circulated the reviewed version to all centers and we asked them to provide any final comments by April. But as you can see here, we still received comments even a month after the deadline. So that meant that we had to go back, edit the agreement, send it back to all centers for another round of review before it was ready to be signed. One particular issue with the agreement, and Andre touched upon this a bit earlier, was that UK centers suggested that we should not mention GDPR, whereas the European centers insisted that GDPR should be mentioned. And to make things even more complicated, European centers started rewording this section on GDPR according to their own default definitions, which in some cases contradicted each other. At the end of July, we sent the final version out to all centers to collect signatures, and we finally had the fully signed agreement in place in October, so more than 2 months later. Another challenging aspect was getting the necessary approvals for the project, both at the local level and as a consortium. For some centers, it was actually much easier than others. So for some centers, a local IRB approval was enough. In addition, Leeds teaching hospitals and some other UK hospitals have an established board which can locally approve the use of radiotherapy data for research. However, some other UK centers did not have this, this board, and therefore they could not get their local approval. So we needed to apply for a central project approval from the Health Research Authority. And many of you will know that this involves filling a very long IRAS form, which we submitted for review to the study sponsor, the University of Leeds. And after several rounds of editing, we submitted it to the HRA and REC for approval. And this whole process was quite time consuming, and it took about 7 months between us submitting the protocol to the study sponsor to the first site being approved. Due to the nature of the project, so no individual level data sharing takes place across centers, and therefore data quality needs to be assessed and ensured locally. And it's paramount that each center spot checks their data to ensure that it's of high quality, but also that it adheres to the coding system that was agreed upon, because centrally we can only see aggregated statistics that they can give some indication of data quality, but not the full picture. In atomCAT 2, for example, one of the centers coded their overall survival status in a different way to the rest. And we only found that out after the analysis, which meant that we had to repeat the model training and validation. In addition, dealing with missing data was a big challenge at the time, and we had to come up with our own imputation framework that was compatible with the capabilities of the Vantage 6 infrastructure. But as Andre has shown, since then, more and more algorithms are being developed, and including data imputation algorithms. Getting the IT infrastructure set up in all centers was also challenging. And some of the centers that initially expressed interest had IT issues, particularly with getting the necessary approvals to install software and open the network ports. So in the end, they were discouraged from participating. We also had various issues with the central server and the federated Cox regression algorithm, which again took a couple of months to resolve with the help of the server hosts and the algorithm developers. So in summary, our three main learning points from this section are that local data collection and curation is still one of the largest barriers, even in federated research. Ethics of using data for research is also an issue, and getting busy clinicians to work with their legal teams is almost impossible. This brings us to the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank my PhD supervisor, Dr. Reina Appelt, as well as the other co-investigators from the 16 atomCAT centers that contributed to the success of this story. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Stelios. Now we're going to proceed to the Q&A session. I noticed that some of the questions have already been answered by Andre. I have one question that popped by a few users around not only the quality of the data that's being used for federated learning, but you will notice that for some problems, so for example, for the anal cancer example that you gave to us, Stelios, you use age, for example, as a parameter. I've worked before in a dementia problem in a federated context, and we used age as well. And we realized that if we train the dementia prediction model with UK data, when we try to predict it in other countries such as China, the model completely breaks. So it's an issue that goes beyond the quality of the data collected, but there is also contextual factors that will affect the effectiveness of the model. So this is a question for both Stelios and Andre, if you came across these issues, and how can we flag this up or conduct meaningful federated learning without diluting results because the cohorts have cultural and contextual differences, even though the data is curated correctly.
Yeah, Andre, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So first of all, I would like to note that this is equally a problem in centralized learning. Right? If a Chinese center submits your dementia data to a central location, then also you have to figure out, oh, this is very different. So what do I need to do now? So it's not really a federated learning question. And the solutions that you apply are the same, right? So you're looking for things like, is there a bias between the two cohorts? The age might be very different, right? Or the outcomes may be very different. And then, or you might have a lot more missing data. We've noticed this in China, for instance, that because of the health systems, they have very few knowledge of who's alive and dead. And for instance, so what do? You start talking to that center and says, what is going on? Why are you so different, right? And then you have some decisions to take. You can exclude the Chinese center completely, or you can include them and see what happens, right? And so, and we do this, right? So as I answered in one of the questions, typically what we find is that the bias is way less of a problem than we think. The AI algorithms that we learn typically benefit from even such a biased Chinese data to learn from. And it doesn't deteriorate the model as much as you might think. So because you can validate the end result in your own data and see if it works with or without the Chinese center in this example. So first of all, it's the same problem as centralized. And second, it's less of a problem than people think, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. There is a question, I think is for you, Andre, from Phil Quinlan. So for the description of the workflow that you use in your Invented 6, does it use TES or WES or arrow crates at all?
No, at the moment, no. I think Carol asked that question, right? So if I, at least I answered that. So I think our crates and things like that, they are describing the research workflow, right? The question, the algorithm, for instance, and the metadata around it, and what does it do? We are doing some of that in the sense that we want to describe, what does this model algorithm actually going to do, and how will it, what does it need, and so forth in this algorithm store idea, but we are not there yet. We're focusing much more on the infrastructure security, accessing the data and getting these things to run, then writing these perfect algorithms that are, for instance, metadata enabled, like with our crates. This is my understanding of it.
Thank you. One question for Stelios. When you say that local collection and curation of data is still one of the largest barriers, can you please explain why this is such a problem for the examples you've worked on?
Yeah. I think it's a challenge in any kind of data project, right? One of the especially clinical and health data is very messy, and collecting it and curating it and also putting it in a format that is consistent across different centers can be quite lengthy and quite difficult. For example, putting data into OMOP, a common data model, it might mean the same thing, but there are still many differences in clinical practice, in the way that the source systems in each hospital work, that make the transformation of this data into a common data model very difficult. And this is what I meant by that. With federated learning, we still need to carry that out, and that first phase of the project, and it's arguably the most important phase of the project, because the quality of the data that we provide for training is what will dictate the quality of the insights that we get from the model as well.
Okay, thank you very much. We are now approaching our end of the webinar. We're running out of time. We'll still try to carry on answering the questions. Thanks, everybody, and I'm looking forward to see you in the next session.